students. Today I will be teaching you about MySQL subquery. So what is a MySQL subquery? A MySQL subquery is a query that is nested inside another insert, update or delete statement. A MySQL subquery can also be nested inside another query. That means if you put one SQL statement inside another SQL statement, you will have two SQL statements, the inner one and the outer one. The inner one forms a subquery that is nested inside the outer one. MySQL subquery can also be used along with the where clause. In MySQL, a subquery can be specified in the where clause along with the comparison operators. The comparison operators can be less than, greater than or equal to. In the next slide, I will show this with an example. In this slide, you have two tables, the table called items and a table called orders. Just consider the table called items and read the question. The question says, write an SQL query to retrieve the details of items. Here the details are not being specified, so we have to presume that we are going to extract all the details of the table named items, and that can be done using the star symbol. Okay, and just continuing, having price per unit greater than the average price per unit. Okay, so we are going to retrieve the details of those items having price per unit greater than the average price per unit, but in this case we don't know the value of the average price per unit from the table items, and therefore we have to calculate the average price. Now check the bottom right corner of the slide. You can see how I calculated the average price per unit from the table called items. Now in the table items, see the price per unit column. There are 4 entries: 100, 200, 450 and 230. Just add up all these. Okay, this gives 100 plus 200 plus 450 plus 230. Okay, and since there are 4 numbers which are 100, 200, 450, 230, so divided by the total number which is 4. So this gives 980 divided by 4, which is equal to 245, and as a result the average price per unit has the value 245. Now you can even read the question like this: write an SQL query to retrieve the details of items having price per unit greater than 245. So instead of that statement average price per unit, which we have calculated as 245, we will write the value 245. Now see the query. Since we are selecting all the details from the table called items, so we'll write select star from items. Okay, select star from items. Where, now in where clause we specify the condition. What is the condition? We are going to retrieve the details of those items which are having price per unit greater than the average price per unit. That is, we are going to retrieve the details of those items which are having price per unit greater than 245. So we will write where price per unit greater than, within bracket, what we will write? We will not write the value 245. We have to write the statement to calculate the average price per unit from the table called items, which is 245, and that statement is select AVG, where AVG stands for average, and then within bracket you write price per unit as the column name from items. So this statement select AVG within bracket the price per unit from items will return the value of the average price per unit from the table called items, and which is 245, and that gives the where condition as the price per unit should be greater than 245. And if we look at that, out of all the rows in the table called items, we can select only one row which is having the price per unit 450. This is because the rest of the rows, the price per unit are less than 245, and in the row with item ID 3, item name as shotgun, item code as T003, the price per unit is greater than 245, and that is 450. So we just select this particular row and it is clearly shown in the output table below. And this SQL statement clearly explains the concept of a subquery, where the first SQL statement, select star from items, is the outer query, and the second SQL statement, which is select AVZ within bracket price per unit from items, is the inner query. As a result, the inner query, that is select AVZ within bracket price per unit from items, forms a subquery of the outer query, which is select star from items. In this way, the queries are nested. Consider both the tables in the slide, the table items and the table orders. Check the query. Select star from items where item ID not in within the bracket, select item ID from orders. Now check the subquery. Select item ID from orders, which is going to return the values of item ID from the orders table. You may check the table called orders. Check the column item ID. It has the entries 1, 2 and 1, 2 being repeated. This shows that the distinct entries in this column item ID of the table orders are 1 and 2 only. So the subquery select item ID from orders will return the values 1 and 2 in the list. Now if you see the query select star from items where item ID not in place of the subquery, you get the values 1 and 2. So the query becomes select star from items where item ID not in the list 1 and 2. This means all the details of the items table will be extracted, but with item ID not as 1 and 2. As a result, the details from the items table having item ID only with the values 3 and 4 are getting displayed. So the output shows 2 rows from the items table with item ID 3 and item name shotgun, and again item ID as 4 and item name as magic bike. In this slide, you will be learning about how to use the MySQL subquery with the exist and the not exist operator. When a subquery is used with the exist or the not exist operator, a subquery returns a boolean value which is either true or false. That means the outer query will act according to the value returned by the inner query or the subquery. If the inner query or the subquery returns a boolean value of true, the outer query will start executing. Or else, if the inner query or the subquery returns a boolean value false, the outer query will not respond. As a result, the subquery acts as an existence check. In this slide, I will demonstrate the concept of an exist operator with the help of a correlated subquery. Now consider both the tables items and orders. See the query. The query says select star from items, which is the first line. This is the outer query. Then where exists. From this line, we mean that we are going to use the exist operator. Then see the subquery, select item ID from items where items.item id is equal to orders.item id. From this subquery, the entries in the column item id will be extracted from the items table based on the joining condition items.item id is equal to orders.item id. For item id as 1 from the items table, we have a matching entry of 1 for item id in the orders table. So the subquery returns true for the item id as 1. So all the details from the outer query select star from items will be extracted for item id as 1, which gives the first row in the output as item id equal to 1, item code as T001, item name as racing car, QTY available as 10, and price per unit as 100. Again see, for the item id as 2 from the items table, we also have a matching entry of 2 for item id in the orders table. So the subquery returns true for item id as 2. So all the details from the outer query select star from items will again be extracted, but this time for item id as 2, which gives the second row in the output as item id equal to 2, item code as T002, item name as Chinese checker, and QTY available as 12. But item id as 3 and 4 from the items table, there are no matching entries of 3 and 4 in the orders table. So the subquery returns false for item id as 3 and 4. Hence, the outer query select star from items will not respond for these two values of item id, and therefore the output shows only the two records with item id values as 1 and 2. The records with item id values 3 and 4 are discarded.